This is your first multi-unit project.
It is. So we're going to talk to you about really the concepts of multi-units, the pros and cons. We're going to talk to you about what went well and also what didn't go well, because we're not going to paint it as all, roses and rainbows. Some things, there were some challenges along the way, wasn't there, Mike?
Yeah. And to be honest, with a project of this scale, there is always going to be things that don't go to plan. And you kind of just need to try and expect that a little bit. And I think we can share some of our learnings so that if you are interested in doing this, you know fully what to expect.
Yeah.
Tonight is really about talking about what Mike and I have been up to for the last 12 odd weeks.
Yeah.
And safe to say we wouldn't have done any of it, Ilse, without your help. So quick introduction. So tonight is brought to you by Lighthouse and Wolfe Property. So myself, James Blair, Wealth Director at Lighthouse, and my co-host of Checks and Balances over there, Michael Vincent, Mortgage Director. But Ilse, tonight is your show. You are the queen of all things, multi-units and adding value, getting those rental yields up. So tonight should be some fun.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm very, very excited because I feel like, I feel like I'm more the bystander in the sense of the before transition, transformation through to the after results, which is what we're here for tonight. Hopefully, you've already been listening to part 1 and 2 of Checks and Balances. And tonight, it's really the crescendo. It's the so what, like what happened, what eventuated. Hopefully, you can take away some amazing lessons that are really pragmatic, going to help you. If you're here, you're probably interested in absolutely supercharging the BRRRR, so buy, renovate, rent, refinance, repeat strategy. And in terms of the conditions and the environment for lending, honestly have not been as good for the last 3 years.
Yeah.
If you've listened to those episodes, this is really what pulls everything together. And I think everyone's very curious as to what's transpired. And I feel like your personal journeys have been quite transformative as well. This is your first multi-unit project.
It is. So we're going to talk to you about really the concepts of multi-units, the pros and cons. We're going to talk to you about what went well and also what didn't go well, because we're not going to paint it as all, roses and rainbows. Some things, there were some challenges along the way, wasn't there, Mike?
Yeah. And to be honest, with a project of this scale, there is always going to be things that don't go to plan. And you kind of just need to try and expect that a little bit. And I think we can share some of our learnings so that if you are interested in doing this, you know fully what to expect.
Yeah. We'll go through some of the pros and cons of scaling up, because this type of project typically requires a lot more from you, a lot more calculations, a lot more resource, and there are risks. So it's actually, I put a story on the Wolfe Property Insta the other day about some of my hardest lessons, and the feedback was so intensive. People saying, thank you so much for sharing this, rather than try and paint like the perfect outcome. It's actually some of the lessons along the way that are most valuable. So I hope you do have your notepads up.
Yeah, that's a big thing. You want to be transparent. You want to be honest. Like, obviously, Ilse's here to help in this space, but it's not about just like selling this perfect dream. It's about talking about, what the journey was actually like. So, Mike, before we jump into it, we love to talk about what Lighthouse is all about. Tell us the story.
Yeah, look, so hey, it's a pretty easy equation, right? We have a pretty firm belief in how to achieve financial freedom, and that is education plus action with a little bit of time sprinkled in there will equal financial freedom. And to be honest, this is just an education piece. This is not taking the action, right? And you will hear us talk about, taking action quite a bit tonight, and there is a lot of things you can do to take action. It doesn't need to be, I need to go out and buy 12 units somewhere and make $1 million or something like that. If that's not what you can do right now, you go, cool. How do I get to that point where I can take action to achieve the goals? So, things as simple as going, okay, let me pull valuations on my house, see what my lending capacity is, see if I'm in the scope for doing some sort of project to try and build my wealth. Those are all things that you can do. So I don't want everyone to kind of look at this and go, I can't do exactly that, so I can't do anything. It's about using those numbers, taking those principles and going, what can I do?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point.
Yeah. This is actually almost disclaimer. This is not your typical 101, like first investment property project. This is definitely like a scale up with confidence, risk appetite, and a bit of a track record, and having the right expertise around you.
Yeah, I just want to expand on that a little bit. Although this is the first kind of multi that James and I have done, you've got to remember this is not the first, piece of property we've purchased or project we've done or something. Cool. So A little bit about Lighthouse. We have 4,000 clients across the country. We've settled over 900 properties. We got $50 million of funds under management, although that probably needs an update, James. Might be a little bit more by now.
Market's up.
Market's up. But, we do know what we're talking about when we give financial advice, just as well as Ilse knows what she's talking about when she's talking about her multis, her BRRRRs, how to make equity quick.
And while we do know what we're talking about, very important to disclaim that tonight is not personalized financial advice, certainly when it comes to multi-units, because this is not for everybody. Tonight is really all about information, so you can be more informed, understand your situation. And then if you want to have a chat with Ilse on the property side, you might want to talk to Mike on the lending side, or you might want to talk to myself on the financial planning side. That's great. Have a chat. But just remember, this is all about, while we're going to talk about a very specific case tonight, it is all about the theory and understanding and education.
All right. Enough of the boring stuff. Let's rip into it. Ilse, come on.
So a little intro from myself. You probably learned a bit about me if you've listened to part 1 and part 2 on checks and balances for Mike and James' journey and project. But if you've not, and this is your first foray because you're interested in multi-units, I'm very much all about the BRRRR. So renovating, adding value. I've been investing for 17 years, probably longer now. I've been saying that for a while. Between my own and my clients' renovations, well over 250 of those. Started as a DIY, learning literally the price per nail all the way up to now coaching my clients all around the world, which is an incredible privilege. I have a portfolio that is exclusively built on the renovations based strategies, and have jumped on checks and balances to share a few of those insights. So definitely look me up.
What's the price of a galvanized now, Mike? That's a line. But if you're a checks and balance diehard, you'll
And just so you know specifically the type of program or service that is basically what Mike and James have implemented through their multi-unit project. That is called the Boardroom by Wolfe Property. And it was really fun actually putting these stats together. I just suddenly realized within a year, there are 137 units that we have, I guess, deployed the strategies, the theory, and with multi-units, it's very different. It's a very different kettle of fish from your standalone BRRRR. So that's a really important distinction to make. And we'll go through a lot of those nuts and bolts tonight as to how they've come up with such an amazing result. But collectively across my clients' projects in the last 11 months, it's $30 million worth of deals of multi-unit, so that's 3 incomes or higher, has literally translated into 46 million of end value. So if you take away the renovation spend, that's a net 11 million, which is actually quite awesome. That's like $1 million.
That's amazing. Yeah.
Awesome. And none of that with consents. So fast, rapid gains. I'm all here for it.
Because the consents weren't required, right?
Because
just to be clear, just to be clear.
Yeah. Retain control. Yeah, for sure. So all, everything always is done to the book, but the nature, it's a good point. What we try to focus on is how to add value in a fast, cost-effective way, where it's all in the hands of what ourselves and our power teams, aka builders, plumbers, electricians, and property managers can handle without needing any red tape, really.
Yeah, those people are pretty important.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. So a quick run through we're going to talk about tonight. We're doing enough introduction here, so I'll keep it very brief. We're going to do a quick OCR recap, which you kind of talked about already. Introduction to multi-unit real estate. What is it? How does it all work? Also, definitely us the one to handle that. We'll then start to talk about our specific project in Upper Hutt, right? So, what was the scope of the project? What are the financials? How do we go about implementing it? Some of the challenges, then the solutions we came up with those challenges as well. And then what everyone wants to hear, the results. How well did we do out of it? And then the Q&A. So
is that called $1 million webinar?
Like yeah.
The outcome $1 million.
Just quickly on the Q&A function, we love to make these really interactive. We will present a lot of information to you, but where we find people get the most value out of these webinars is when they use the Q&A function. So it's all anonymous. It is not the chat section. You'll see a button next to it that says Q&A. Please use that one so we don't have to scroll through all the chats.
Yeah. So Ilse, before we get into the specific of the property, really keen for you to talk us through multis versus single income because they're very different worlds.
They really are. So the BRRRR and renovations-based strategies, I guess the principles are the same. If I were to distinguish or separate standalone or single income, so that's just to define, that might be a 3 or 4 bedroom standalone house, freehold property on a section of land. That would be your classic older suburb, a house built 1950s up to 1970s, say. Multi-units is how, at least for my definition for boardroom, is 3 or more incomes. And basically, if you think about all the benefits of an existing build where you can renovate to add value, with multi-units, it's like all the benefits on steroids. If I can put it that way. So I'll do a quick run here through of the benefits and then also the risks, because as we said before, this is not a 101. This is not necessarily a first time renovators project type. And you'll quite quickly probably work out whether you're either ready for this, or what you need to take is what are the steps with your advisor, assess your lending with the Lighthouse team as to where you are now. What other steps do you need to take to get ready or ready yourself for this? So think about it that way. In terms of the benefits, one of the most obvious ones, or the most impactful ones rather, is the land efficiency. So that sounds like words, but basically you normally have one house on one land title. So if you buy a standalone property for $400,000, you get one house or dwelling or rental and the land. Multi-units, there's an efficiency. So basically you typically get one title with several dwellings on that single title. Usually what that means, or what it should allude to, is a slight discount because you're purchasing still one title. And in New Zealand, we have extremely finite land. That's the valuable part. So that's the kind of, if you think about it that way, we're looking at as many dwellings or rentals and cash flows per one purchase. Compounded outcomes as well as this kind of supercharged or burr on steroids. So everything becomes stronger because you have multiple incomes or rents to improve and cosmetically renovate. Normally, I talk about cash flow hacking and needing to add bedrooms. For multi-units, that's definitely not the mandatory. It's definitely not the case. It's more about what is the margin of cash flow improvement I can make from taking this original retro unit times 3 times 10 times 12 in their case, to get a really great increase in cash flow times 12. The income sustainability piece is a key consideration. When you have a registered valuer come through to look at it, you'll see at the end here, we're actually going to talk about how this project has 2 different potential values, which on a standalone basis, you don't have.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a bit of an interesting hook actually, because there are 2 different values based on 2 different income or tenant outcomes. So we'll just leave you hanging with that for a minute. Next, a couple of key benefits. If you're looking to screenshot, definitely these are the slides to go for, as well as the risks. So the cap rate, I mentioned briefly on the story on the way over here today. So capitalized rate, this is basically a method of value based on income. So again, it all relates back to incomes for multi-units. The more you can strengthen the cash flows and create sustainable income without risk of vacancy and these sorts of elements, it adds to your end value. So when we move into multi-units, we're sort of moving into this, it's called resi-mercial.
Yeah.
It's a residential purpose, but it's more of a commercial lease methodology. And this is where there's a bit of a gray area on the lending that I think Mike can shed some light on as we go.
Yeah, that kind of resi security with a commercial style rent on top of it is actually a really valuable thing. And the ideal out of this is that it's a resi style property on resi interest rates, or residential interest rates. And I'll talk about that a bit later, the difference between kind of residential lending and commercial lending. And residential lending is a little bit cheaper, but there's nothing to be scared of if you have to do a commercial loan on these properties.
Ilse, one thing I think about immediately, capitalized rate of value. For those that don't know, what the hell is that?
Yeah. So basically, gosh, how to define? So it is basically it's an income related benchmark or yardstick. So when they look, when a valuer comes through and looks at your property, they are going to look at other sales of multi-unit sales, not necessarily within Upper Hutt. They can go as far afield as they want to.
Yeah.
They are going to look at other sales and look at the price sold for relative to the income.
Yeah.
So the more powerful you can create the income and how strong the market is, it does have a reaction to where the retail rates are at. It's kind of ironic and counterintuitive, but the lower the retail rates drop, the lower the cap rate drops is a consistent trend. It's commensurate with the retail rates, has an upward effect on value.
Yeah. So again, there's a lot to think about with the multis as opposed to the resi stuff. And although some of the technical terms might sound a little intimidating, all of this is kind of covered off, one, by your valuer, and two, also lends us quite a lot of expertise when we were looking at this.
That's putting it softly, Mike.
Thank you, Darren Lockyer. Yeah, it's quite funny because when it's one of those things where both James and I work in this industry every day, right? I work with property and lending. James works with wealth management. But as soon as we strayed a little bit outside of our lane, James and I very quickly realized that we really didn't know a lot here, right? Like when we talk about cap rates or, the efficiencies of multis, and this is before we even get into the the project side of it, the construction side of it, the things to look for, the associated costs, all of that is, although it's within our kind of hemisphere, is so far outside of our lane. Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. So you might be thinking, well, why would I not stick with a standalone house? With my clients, we look to achieve an 8% return, and it's a return on total debt, assuming the whole thing is debt funded. So say you have a purchase price and then renovation on a standalone property. To create an 8% return, we might cap that total lending somewhere between $450,000 and $500,000.
Yeah.
On a multi-unit, you're easily $1 million plus. Typically, you'll see here it's a heck of a lot more. So why would you debt load? Why would you have more debt? Well, if you are going to, you expect a higher performing debt. I harp on a lot about lazy versus hardworking debt. In the case of having 3 or more incomes, to justify that higher debt, you want really high rents or incomes to hold it up, basically. Cool. Let's talk a little bit about the risks. So this is not for everybody, and it's not a first project necessarily. This is something to sort of aspire to. If you cut your teeth on a standalone renovation, you can build up on the same principles, but there are different risks to think about. So the first one I sort of touched on is the lending at scale. So from a debt to income point of view, this is likely going to chew up a bit more extra debt.
Yeah, absolutely right. So with these properties, at best, you're going to need a 30% deposit. Typically, though, you would want to make sure you've got maybe a little bit more in terms of your balance sheet. And one of the ways that James and I got around this is James and I are 2 separate households with 2 separate pieces of equity, right?
That might surprise some people that were in separate households.
Yeah. But, if you look at just James on his own or just myself on my own, we don't have the equity or the deposit to put in. So we've kind of joined forces and done it together. That is something you also need to be really careful about. James and I spend 90% of our time together almost every day, right? Probably more, actually. I'm
looking forward to the Christmas break.
Yeah. So, and we say this quite often when people are going in with friends, family or something. You got to think about the best situation and the worst situation, right? And we'll talk about that a little bit later in terms of some of our learnings, but you want to make sure that if you are going in with people, that you plan it out really well.
I think that's really important because in all respects, you're scaling everything up, right? You're not going from a $500K debt to a 600. You're going from this to, in this case, $2.4 million purchase plus renovation.
Yeah.
A 10% variance at 500K is so different from 10%. They're like nodding each other going, yeah.
Yep.
So, and the other thing to think about, Mike can talk to this more specifically, but on lending, different banks have different policies, and this type of property can fall in or out of favor depending on how they feel on the day.
Yeah.
Almost. That's from my point of view as a consumer. That's what it looks like.
Yeah. And it literally is that, right? So some days of the week, banks are like, yep, we have an appetite for this type of debt. And then something might change internally. Their risk policy might change. Their credit policy might change. They might just be overweight on this type of security or in this location. And you'll see that with some commercial loans where, this commercial loan might have been in place for 10 years and someone goes to renew it and the bank turns around and goes, nope, we're not going to renew this. You have to go find lending somewhere else. And for the last 18 to 24 months in the commercial space, you've seen that quite a bit where banks did not have the appetite for the lending. So they would just shoo it out the door.
Would it be fair to say you need a strong balance sheet and buffer cash flow?
You definitely need a strong balance sheet because it is with residential lending, a bank or a lender will assess the deal and go, you know what, if this falls over, I got 20% equity in there, I can probably sell it. With a project of this scale, just to be able to afford it isn't quite enough. A bank will look at that and go, yep, this scrapes through. I don't like that. That's not enough of a risk buffer for me. Because if you think about it, like we sort of said, a 10% shift on a $600,000 house, fine. a 10% shift on all in, what is it, almost $2.7 million project, that's a much different risk profile for the bank. Yeah.
So it's great to talk about theory, but what's way more fun is talking about a specific deal.
The money you've made.
Yeah.
Should we start right from the start, James? Let's go. Let's rewind right to the start.
This will be fun. This will be fun. So I remember you guys talking about this deal and going, "There's a place in Upper Hutt." And as soon as I started hearing about it, I'm like, I want in. Nothing's happening without me. You guys are stuck with me. This is happening.
Yeah.
And then we got it under contract, and that was all great. But then we got quite scared near the end, didn't we, Mike?
Let's go back slightly a little bit further. Ooh. There was a phone call between James and Ilse, where James calls Ilse and goes, "Ilse, I don't believe you. What's the cat?
I don't." Yeah.
My job as I recall, my job as a financial advisor is to say if something sounds too good to be true, it usually is. Was literally the opening line of our conversation. I'm like, oh, here's a phone call from James. This would be positive.
Yeah. Yet I think it's important to, my style is pleasant, bubbly, but honest. Yeah. And when Mike is going, "James, this CV is $4.8 million. We're going to buy it for $2.4 million. The only problem we're going to have is what are we going to do with all this money?" And I was like, hold up, let me call Ilse, because this is just it, like, when it just sounds too good to be true. And once you start to work through the detail and understand that not everybody can play in this space, the level of debt you're committing to, the risk behind it, some of the things we had to sort out in the way, you're starting to go, well, there's a risk premium here. And I'm starting to understand the risk premium. And also to add to it, if you and I did this by ourselves,
we'd be broke. We'd be broke. We would have stuffed this up. Yeah.
Like you talk about these things all the time. Like, you have done enough of these to go, I know that a decent percentage of these houses under the bath is going to be rotten floorboards. And I'm going to see these things in certain parts of the country. Well, if you're a first timer, you're just going to go, oh, I have maxed my lending out. I have no spare capital to deal with these things. So I did go to Ilse. I was like, look, this feels too good to be true. We ran through the numbers. I was like, I'll bet my life on it.
Yeah. And no, I think great conversation to have, because it actually was a good reset for myself. I'm so used to seeing this. And also, I talk about 100 and whatever units that we have renovated. There are hundreds more that we've reviewed that don't meet the criteria to get to this high, 10% plus gross return. We want a high cash flow that's going to help clients or investors get into a passive cash flow situation ASAP. That's what everyone wants. So that was important for me to appreciate. It's not common knowledge, basically. And I think, if you don't mind just illustrating, I think what is really cool to contrast is, I think from your point of view, when we had this conversation, when this deal came up, you were comparing it to a rental that you have.
I did it. I'm selling it. I literally met with a real estate agent today to put it on the market in January because, capital gains over, I've still made $500,000 on it over 8-9 years. Not bad, but I'm burning cash and I just want to go do this again. So I think that bias impacts. So
let's run through the numbers a little bit about what really attracted us about this property. So when this property came across my desk, all I saw was a rough outline of the numbers, right? So 12 units on 12 titles, which is pretty unique. Usually we'll get 12 units on one title. What that means is that instantly puts it basically into a commercial lending space with higher interest rates. So having separate titles for the 12 units means it's more likely to actually fall into residential lending. You're lowering that interest cost, increasing that rate of return on the investment. The purchase price, $2.4 million. The CV on this property, $4.8 million, right? So I look at that alone and I go, that's about half price.
Yeah.
This ain't no Briscoe sale, but I think that's pretty good.
Yeah, it is Black Friday coming up.
Yeah.
The other big thing was the rents. So the rents on these properties, some of these people that lived in these properties, they were worn down properties. They were getting rented for between $220 and $300 a week.
Yep.
And I remember when we went down to site and we were sitting on the floor of one of these units.
Floor?
Yeah, and you could feel the concrete underneath. And I looked over and I said to Mike, Mike and I have been mates for like well over 10 years, started selling credit cards in the call center together at a bank. And I looked over at Mike and I was like, you know what, Mike? If you said to me, you and I would end up in a 1-bedroom unit Upper Hutt in this sort of state, I go, hasn't worked out very well for us. But here we are.
Yeah. And I think, again, that's really important to point out is when you're looking at the photos of these properties, it's almost one of the things where it puts other people off. Potentially, that's a thing that should kind of turn you on to the
That's the
investment, right?
opportunity. 100%.
It looks ugly,
Mhm.
but if it's just cosmetically ugly, it may be a really
Yeah.
pretty
I think
investment.
It's critical. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say to Ilse, I think that's a really interesting one. So we're starting to look for our next project as well. And I look at some of the ones online and I'm like, oh, this looks way too nice. I don't want this.
Yeah.
And it's almost like the worse it is, the more interested I get in it.
Like smack bang on the point, which is one of the biggest levers to add value for a multi-unit is the margin from how low to how high. The larger the margin of the increase in the rent times the multiple of dwellings is going to have this magic compounded effect. So literally the uglier the better, as long as you still have your expert team, building inspection, methods, etc. You want the experts to still run through every dwelling without major issues. This is the goal. The ones that put people off actually narrow your competition.
Yeah. The cosmetic renovations opposed to there's something
Structural.
fundamentally wrong with the building.
Yeah. This is calculable, and the number of potential and then deals that have gone ahead, there are ratios that become quite clear in what makes the deal work or not. So.
Yeah. So Mike, obviously, so we've signed a contract and then I've gone, Mike, you can get us the lending, eh?
Yeah. So the first thing you've kind of got to do with these properties is I can't get you a pre-approval, right? It does not work like that for this style of property. If you said to me, Mike, I want to buy 2-bedroom townhouse, central Auckland, central anywhere, we can get you a pre-approval for that. This is not that type of project. This is not that type of lending. So we had to start by putting the property under contract. And to be honest, that can be a pretty daunting process for some people because you're signing what is effectively a legal document that if you can't back out of, you have to buy this property. Otherwise, you are going to get hit with some penalties. But to our point, and we're going to say this quite a bit tonight, if you have the right team around you, the legal should be fine. You should be able to do your due diligence on it. Yeah.
It's so funny, like where we are now looking at the second one versus the first one and the questions we were asking you and not wanting to sign the contract. We got this close to backing out of the contract in the last minute because the valuation, like we looked at a $4.8 million CV on this property and we're like, if we renovate it, it's going to be worth $4.8 million. It wasn't worth $4.8 million, but because we had an anchoring bias of how high we thought the property would be, we got very close to walking away on the deal, right?
To flip it for $100,000.
Yeah, we could contemporaneously settle it and make $100,000 off it. And we're looking at each other like, people work a whole year for less than $100,000. We could get this in 4 or 5 days. So once we kind of wrapped our head around the deal with quite a bit of help from Ilse, we then started to look at, what are the financials behind this and how can we actually get the lending to work? So we had a due diligence period in that contract where we could do the legal due diligence, the financial due diligence, and the building inspection, a couple of other things in there as well. The financial due diligence basically means we take our personal situation, we take the sale and purchase agreement, and we go to a bank and say, can we get the lending for this? And, most people on this call are going to know this process, so I won't go into it in too fine a detail. But effectively what we did is we went, James has some capital, Mike has some capital, it is equity in our existing owner-occupied and investment properties. We put that together or combined it to give us the minimum amount of equity or deposit to purchase this, right? So we then went to a couple of different banks and we landed on Kiwi Bank at the end and went, hey, here's what the project is, or here's the current state of the property, right? We have basically 12 dwellings, average rent, here's the return, here's the value. Here is what we are pitching at the end of the project, right? Because you've got to give them a before and after. Otherwise, you may end up getting stuck where you can't fund the development or the build. And again, when you are working with a broker or a banker for this, you've got to be really clear on the scope of the project, the cost of the project, and who's actually managing the project. If you look at it from a bank's perspective with the lending, one thing to buy, a $2.4 million property, it's in a very different kettle of fish to turn around and go, hey, we're going to spend X amount of money ripping this whole thing apart and trying to put it back together again in like 10 weeks. And we're going to get this amazing outcome at the end. Much like James thought at the start, the banker will say that's too good to be true. You need to tip him more cash, right?
Mm-hmm. And then if you look at this table on the screen, you actually, it's only, 4 rows, but you go, the combination of people involved in getting to these outcomes, right? So the rent, we haven't just made up these numbers. We've gone and got appraisals to go, if we add this value, if it is a tidy finish, where will we land? The value at the end, working with valuers, talking about the different scenarios, which there was quite a few different scenarios of how this could play out. And the builder. So we're spending quite a bit of money on adding value to these properties. If we're off, this is going to have a huge implication. We could run out of money. Then we end up with these properties that aren't done. There's a lot of complexity behind it.
Yep.
Yeah, sure. So we'll jump into the mechanics because you knew the before and the kind of we've laid the scene, right? So I guess in summary for the due diligence side of things, this type of property does need time. So don't throw your solicitor and your mortgage advisor under the bus. Mike's like, no, thank you. At least 10 working days would be the absolute minimum, as long as you've also been able to book in a lot of the reports and what is needed to get your finance across the line. This is not a straightforward property. Quick rundown of the Reno budget here so you can really see. And a couple of promises that I did break just to show this wasn't like a perfect storm. I promised, well, I didn't promise. Did I promise? A 10-week Reno.
Definitely promise.
Yeah. Okay. Full disclosure, it's 12. It was 12. So I'm sorry. So that's the first thing. Second thing is I was quite bullish when we first got down. Some reels may have gone out suggesting that the renovation budget would be $240K, and I was feeling pretty confident at the beginning that we'd be within budget. So that was also in a slightly different scope. This is the reality. Full disclosure, where it's landed. I have to say, per unit, 27,000 though is still well under the norm.
Yeah. And there's a lot of things you can kind of do, or we did in this process to work to achieve that. So again, James and I, this is not our world. I was a tradie for all of about 5 minutes. Those supple finance hands on James have never touched a spade in their life. So this is where you really have to lean on the experts like Ilse to really talk you through this. And Ilse was amazing in terms of saying, look, here is what we need to do. Here is a high level outline. I'm going to introduce you to a couple of builders and they are going to walk you through the entire process. You will meet them face to face, get to know them, pick the one that you want, and then we'll try and drill into it from there. And we did go slightly over on the Reno budget, but the great thing was the builder that we chose, did a really detailed analysis and gave us those numbers ahead of diving into everything. So we knew what we were up for. It's not like it was a last minute surprise. And the really good important thing from the financial perspective is that we then turned around to the bank and said, hey guys, we're going to go a little bit over budget here. Can we still do X, Y, Z? We still had scope to move. So we got the increase in the construction loan approved, well before we actually had to start the build.
And just to clarify, in terms of beefing up the Reno spend, it was really to massively enhance the scope. So we ran several scenarios with the formal appraisals that would come from several property managers. So it's not Ilse saying, hey, these might be before 70. We get 3, local professional property managers. So based on the skimpier budget, what could we achieve? Let's analyze that in parallel to if we go the full hog, full cosmetic, build team, plaster paint, and in
Kitchens.
your case, actually, full exterior repaint is not part of the normal scope. For that to be divvied up per unit makes this incredibly efficient. And you naturally do get some efficiencies as well because the painters are going to come to site to do X, Y, Z anyway. You may as well get a bigger team to come and smash out a bigger day, and the travel's the same, right?
Yeah.
So
that was one thing when once we realized our budget was going up, we went line by line, and
literally
the poor builders, the poor painters, we really pushed them on price. And then we talked about, to Ilse's point, what are ways that we can make this more cost effective? So instead of doing the painting unit by unit externally, can we go and do it all at once? Can we buy things in bulk? What are the ways that we can make it more efficient?
Our builder day was had a lot of initiative, which isn't a typical characteristic. A lot of
no shade on the builders out there.
No, in the sense of it's like obviously execution. I don't mean that offensively, but in the sense of it's execution. But Dave was so proactive and thinking, because he's an investor, he's thinking, what do Mike and James think about? Okay, well, if we go and buy 12 vanities at once, I can pass it on an efficient price here.
Yeah.
So he actually thought that way on your behalf, which really helped the results as well.
Now, Ilse, one question I've got for you on the renovation side, which a lot of first timers I think would really struggle with, because something I really struggled with is going, what do you spend money on versus what you don't spend money on?
Yeah.
Because you might look at it and go, oh, if I lived here, I would love to have these taps or this addition to the bathroom or whatever. Like, how do you work out how far to take it versus, efficiency of every dollar at the end of it?
Really good question. I think here where we're talking 12 homes, obviously the lower the price per unit helps massively, because things can vary very rapidly. There are two perspectives to think about that from, or to answer that question from. The first one is, will that spend improve my rent times 12, therefore my cash flow, and also an impact on value? Or will it add to the value? Because you could change the roof and the tenant doesn't care.
No.
Change the rent, doesn't care. It doesn't change.
Value doesn't go up.
Exactly. So there were some sacrifices we made, because we were thinking to paint and re-roof. Right? Initially, we were thinking maybe 2 A-frames would have to be re-roofed. Actually, with a really good house wash, worked out we didn't need to do that. So there were some really awesome savings as well. So to answer that question, it's think about it from your point of view. Do you want the rent increase? And even if it is a standalone rental you have, do you want to spend to increase your rent because it impacts the quality of the rental for the tenant? Or is it for value for you? And depending on what your priority is, we'll probably give you the answer. Really quick snapshot here of the renovation. So we call it the flow because it was actually awesome. So again, Dave leading the build team. We'll get into the tenant side, which is a really awesome, unique outcome for Mike and James here. That was just the coolest solution for these tenants. But this is typically a 6 or 7 week turnaround. And when James and Mike settled this property, 2 units were vacant. And it was basically like this really awesome chess. We call it like jigsaw puzzle. That
shuffle.
You talk about the shuffle.
Yeah. So what we did, because usually with these projects, let's say that you were fully tenanted, you have got to get people out of the units to do the work. And depending on the block, you actually have to get everyone out of the block. So you have this kind of lull in the cash flow where you are propping up the mortgage and funding the renovations without any cash coming in. That wasn't the case for us. So we had 2 empty units at the start. So what we did was did those 2 first, shuffled 2 people, 2 tenants into them, did the next 2, the next 2, the next 2, the next 2. And, more or less that's how it's worked out for the entire renovation. So we haven't had that drop in cash flow coming through while we've been doing the renovations, which has definitely helped on the lending side.
That's quite rare too, by the way. There usually would be a sacrifice. If you have a block of 3, not such a big deal as long as you account for holding costs to go, let's get full vacancy. Therefore, efficiency on the build team where they can pre-plumb, pre-wire, install, paint, everything's in sync, can be slightly faster overall. But when you have 12 units, to drop 12 lots of cash flow is so risky that actually creating segments of notices. I know on one of my larger properties, it was 3 physical buildings, and I gave notice 30 days apart across each of those units in that block, and that staggered the drop in cash flow. But what to make really clear is that your tenants moved twice. So this 3-week reno was the build team physically moved all the belongings and these tenants into their temporary 3-week home and then back, which is incredible. And you'll realize the benefit afterwards as to why they did that as well. But, there was a lot of physical movement to make it work, but it really helped financially.
And it's just stresses the importance of having good people on the ground. Like, I mean, you and I have had a lot of involvement, but like the builders on the ground, the property managers have done so having the right people. Imagine if we had the wrong people on the ground. Imagine how painful it would have been. And
I think, sorry, if you don't mind, I think talking about the property manager that you went with versus the other option, why you chose the existing manager.
They've been amazing. Yeah. So from a property, the other thing to think about is from a property manager's perspective, you're talking about 12 units, you're talking about an investor who might decide to grow their portfolio. We're talking about increasing the rents. They want to retain you as a client. They know they've had this income stream for a long time. There's some potential risk. And these guys, bent over backwards to keep us, to look after us, to go like, we'll tidy up the site. Here are the introductions, just making it so easy that having the right people on ground is so important.
And they actually they held the key to the rapport with each of those relationships, right? So they had very personal knowledge and relationships with each of those people. So to manage your plan from end to end and go, actually, if we can hold these same tenants, because of their relationship, which is stronger than yours with these new tenants, they're thinking, here are these two guys that are flying down from Auckland.
Yeah.
What are they doing? There was a bit of fear. That's that's so common. What's happening as they see all these people traipsing through, and actually the value of having that relationship with their relationships with 10 tenants was very valuable.
Before we move on, we talk all the time about planning and growing our wealth, but protecting that wealth is just as important. That's why having the right insurance in place can help when life goes unexpectedly.
And that's why this episode is brought to you by Partners Life, a New Zealand operated award-winning insurance provider with over 300,000 Kiwis insured and 89% of claims paid.
Partners Life understand that having some insurance is better than having no insurance. They have flexible and personalized solutions for any budget or situation.
Check out their website in our show notes below. So, it's not always smooth sailing, Gems. We made a bit of money pretty quickly. Let's talk about some of the challenges, because that's really important to focus on. So one of the things that kind of came unstuck was around our legal team and the title and the way that they kind of executed the transaction from purchase. And then that kind of impacted us when we started to do the renovations and the construction drawdown.
Yeah.
Effectively, it's not a standard way, or it's not a standard title. You don't usually get 12 units, 12 individual titles. So they actually loaded the title incorrectly. So while the purchase happened without any hiccups, we then had a construction team that moved in, started doing the work. We turned around to the bank and said, hey guys, can we get that first drawdown payment to pay our builder who has fronted all the costs for about a week and a half? And the bank said, nope, you can't have that because the title has been loaded incorrectly. You have one mortgage over 12 titles instead of 12 mortgages over 12 titles. So at that point, that's not a quick fix. We need to basically remortgage the entire property, remove the titles, remove the e-dealings, do it all again. On the flip side of that, we have a builder who we really don't want to sour the relationship with, because he's been amazing and he's fronted all this cost. So James and I actually had to tip cash in to make that initial payment of about $90,000 to the builder to keep that project going. Otherwise, you go, we've lost a bit of credibility on the first payment. Our 10-week, 12-week project could turn into a longer project, which is worse for the cash flow. And I think it's really important to point out here that this is not a beginner property, right? You've got to have a bit of balance sheet. You've got to have a bit of spare cash, because things like this will go wrong and it can't always be covered really quickly by the bank.
Yeah, I still felt it when we made that payment though. And the big thing is, right, so you're looking at this, Mike and I are, in terms of Lighthouse, Mike and I get here at like 7 o'clock in the morning, leave 6 o'clock at night. Like we're busy talking to clients all day. And then we're suddenly getting builders calling us being like,
where's money?
Where's my money? I paid you guys. Like what's going on? Then you call the bank points at the lawyers point at the bank. And you're like, somebody fix this problem.
Yeah.
And then we're like, well, we're just gonna have to pay the builder to get this rolling. And then we're signing all these documents over and over and over again to try and get the outcome. But you just got to roll with the punches. You just got to go, all right, this thing's come up. How are we going to fix it? Making sure that as you start these projects, you've got, like Mike said, you've got some balance sheet behind you to be able to work through it. And you've got I do think sometimes, like when I meet people that are, what's the right word? Highly strung. Like if they're going to, you can't get too stressed out about this stuff, right? You just got to be able to go, here's the fire, sort the fire, move on to the next thing, because it's just going to happen.
You have to break it down into steps, one action to another to problem solve, because it won't go perfectly to plan. It just won't. Your best mindset is to go into a project like this thinking something will come up, albeit I've never seen this come up. Something will come up. You have to be prepared. If you expect it, just look for it. And when it happens, you're like, cool, what's my action plan? basically that's the only way you can deal with it. But just expect that there will be something. It's a good way to go in.
And like with this as well, like to that second point, like with the builder's been fabulous. But I mean, the reality is a lot of builders just aren't great with like the admin side and answering emails. They're on site dealing with things. We must have asked for the like the building contract so we could get this to the bank a lot of times. But
it's not a priority for him.
It's not his skill set. He's thinking, I've got to arrange my guys. I've got to make sure I've got all the equipment. I want to get going. So just really emphasizing the important, and probably the other thing we've learned is how to communicate with builders.
Yeah. And the reason why that's really important is if you have got, I mean, the build contract specifically, if you are funding a project like James and I have funded this with the purchase and then the construction loan separate, the bank will not pay just here's money because you're asking for it. They need a construction contract with a schedule of payments or some type of outline so they can track whether or not this project is going off track. And if it is going off track, they will stop the payments and try and get it back on track. So that's just kind of one of the things we learn along the way. And again, to James's point, that's more around our communication with the builder as well. We should have been like, hey, we actually need this today. We can't do anything else until we get this. And again, it's just that cash flow timings kind of got a little bit muddled up.
And the difference between this I would say this is more the rare situation. Most of my clients would have the renovation budget as part of their usable equity.
Yes.
Where they're funding the deposit from. So the bank is not asking for documentation, but I guess there's one way and this is a different second way. Yeah.
Now, Michael, you're smiling. Let's talk about the original valuation we did, shall we?
Yeah. So look, I talk a lot. I'm not a great communicator. I know Ravi's telling us to hurry up, but this is probably important.
Yeah. Wait your turn, Ravi. Wait your turn.
Yeah. So look, James and I kind of really fulfill two really separate roles in this project. James, far more the people person, far more the communicator, very effective with his communication. Mike, blunt. Numbers. I'll get you the money. I don't pad out my communication a lot. So we did come to a bit of a head, both myself and the registered valuer, where I thought I asked for something. He didn't think I asked for something. What we got was slightly different. We had a very tense conversation. And then I haven't spoken to him since. And James has moved in to handle the comms between us and the registered valuer.
We're close. We got on well.
He's really good. It's just,
he sent me the comms with him and Mike. I can confirm Mike did not give clear instructions. So we ran into, there's probably quite a few things around the valuation to go through. The first one was, and Ilse was very clear around this. So the whole piece around 12 individual titles. So we wanted to know if post renovation, what these units could individually sell for, which is really important. We did not get that in the original valuation. So we then had to go back and spend like another $2,000 to go and get the valuation that we needed. I don't think you've ever given me that money. You can pay for it inside to deal with that. So we went back and got that valuation. Now, that was all fine. That got sorted. Now, one of the really big pieces, which resulted in me probably doing 100 cold emails and phone calls, was the valuer put something in that was quite interesting going, if you do get a head tenant, i.e. like a social housing head tenant, the valuation will jump $500,000. And I'm like, okay, let's start talking. And Ilse, you called everybody you could have called. I called everybody that I could have called because there was a lot of motivation to get there.
This will be a big part of the so what and the two outcomes, actually. So we'll definitely we'll lead into that more. What is really, I would say, for the context of the current environment. Yes, the great thing is with national coming back in, we got interest deductibility back. So positive cash flow. One of the unintended consequences is that a lot of the funding for social housing, which in this type of property is a fantastic option in many cases by virtue of a lot of tenants in close proximity, there is a sort of cohabitation dynamic that needs to be managed. What I would say is all the projects under the Labor government, very easy to go, for myself, and go, cool, Mike and James have got this. Let's go A, B, C, social relationships. We'd get to A, B, sometimes C, and have that head tenant locked. And you'll see why that's important in a moment. We went all the way to Z, and then James went in also cold called a whole bunch of tenants because you'll see this is a $550K difference in value, but extremely difficult to get if the funding is not there. So
yeah, and it was a little bit of a at the exact point when we were trying to find a head tenant, there was no funding available for head tenants. That, as of yesterday, has now started to shift back into favor where head tenants or social housing providers have a bit more capital behind them.
We'll move on, but we'll explain why it's quite favorable in many cases.
So we kind of talked about a lot of the solutions probably as we went explaining there. Was there anything else we wanted to touch on?
No, I think that's probably everything.
All right.
Cool. So I think a really important thing to touch on is obviously we've increased the rent on these properties. There's always like the ethical question that comes up here in terms of property investors. Can I just say, anybody that you care about, you would not want them living in these units the way they were. They were not good. They were not warm.
Moldy.
They were not good. Now you look at these properties, they are like beautiful. They've been looked after really well. We've managed cost during it, but the outcomes here these are
effectively get a brand new home.
Yeah, tidy, clean homes. And so I was just gonna say, talking to the property manager on the ground, the tenants are stoked.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It was gorgeous. I went mid renovation. About half of the units had been renovated, popped in for a look, and you'll see I took the cutest photo of the tenants. One of the older ladies literally bringing her neighbor in to check out her new home. And just you would have noticed on those photos, there was actually a mix of, you would have spotted that a couple of them would have, they have these stainless steel bench tops. So what we're trying to do is create the best rent and the best upgrades, but at the same time, you still want to think about durability. You cannot beat a stainless steel bench. Different case and different answer, perhaps if you were flipping the house or trading that house, they are holding on to this as a cash flow income. So the decisions around materials are somewhat different. So, but yeah, moving ahead to those tenants, this is the cutest photo that I took. Jan showing her neighbor. So Jan in the front was like, come and see my home. And she was just being moved back into her newly renovated place where her friend who's in the other part of her A-frame was actually in her current 3-week other house. So she was like, come and check it out. They were so excited. Do you want to talk to any of these other points?
Yeah, so again, it's one of those things where a lot of things happened with the project that went really well, and we're really tossing up between trying to get a head tenant, but actually the outcome for us has been really good because we're not kicking people out of these homes. They've got a really nice new place to live, and we've got a really great outcome as well.
Awesome. So now we're heading into the results really, and actually there's two different scenarios. So just to clarify definitions on gross return as well, you might have seen on one of the earlier slides, there was a little bit of a precursor to some of the values there. So in terms of how I would talk about or standardize for boardroom or multi-units, when I talk about a gross return, it's on the return on capital or a total debt. And in this case, and even if I have a client who puts cash in, I'll assume it's all debt just so we can standardize the return apples with apples. So in this case, one of the possible outcomes could have been, and based on Chris Bishop yesterday actually saying that they're going to support community housing, because it's not as though it's gone away. The matter and the need is still there. So it's a brilliant move. Let's get it back. There are a couple of key elements that make having a government blue chip, effectively a blue chip tenant. It's not just get a head tenant, it's a blue chip government tenant. Sustainable income, guaranteed income, generally a 3 or higher year lease, basically turns this property from a residential into a commercial. So that sustainable income and that 0% vacancy, regardless of who's occupying or not, guaranteed income drops the cap rate. So we talked about that a bit earlier. The cap rate, the lower it is, the higher your property values up. So it's quite a weird counterintuitive thing to get your head around. So in this case, had James and Mike managed to get a suitable government tenant, which could have been one of those examples on the previous slide, the upon complete value, and just to say, this is from 3 OCR rates ago when we were in due diligence, or they were in due diligence, this is a cap rate forecasted at that point in time that the value from doing the works that they've now completed is a $4.14 million end value. Just to give you that second scenario, which contrasts to that, You'll notice here there are two lines in red, the OPEX, so the operating expenses. This is the key variance based on what I previously said. So when you have 12 individual tenancies, which is what they do have based on retaining the tenants that they wanted to shuffle out and shuffle back, there is a risk that a registered valuer who is conservative by nature is always going to factor in.
Yeah.
So even though that cash flow is actually in reality permanent, they will always factor in vacancy. So that comes at a cost, which I think on their forecast was like $15,000 per year. And then the operating costs are higher because when you don't have a head or government tenant, you then are paying a professional management, and that's worthwhile, but it adds to that cost. The cap rate in this case is oddly only 10 points above. So from 5.3 with the government, 5.4, that is odd. That's actually very odd. Normally there'd be about a 25 to 50 point difference. I would almost argue that the government one should be lower, therefore the value much larger. But anyway, vacancy, you see there's $14,000. Because of those two changes across 12 tenancies, you see 3.59. So it's a massive difference in outcome.
Yeah. To be honest though, the outcome, pretty bloody good, James.
I'm pretty happy.
Yeah.
So basically Reno spend $327K divided by 12. So awesome, like 20 odd thousand per unit. So value added was 1.74. We said 1 mil, but 1.74 is huge in that potential future government head lease scenario. And then the reality is with the 12 tenants, you've actually made 1.19 additional wealth or value on that property. So the value of that property is 3.59 12 weeks later.
Pleasure doing business with you, James.
Yeah. And the other piece that we haven't talked about at all within this presentation is where we are in the market. So we've talked about the OCR and the OCR dropping, but the big thing is we bought this property in July, August, and
the official cash rate was 1% higher. Interest rates were significantly higher because the banks had started decreasing. Yeah, it was a pretty cold winter out there.
Yeah, and the big thing that Mike and I are now talking about is we want to get the next one because the market, while I don't think it's going to go crazy tomorrow, there is certainly a period where the space in terms of negotiation is going to get a hell of a lot more competitive over however long it takes, 100%. And trying to get that next one locked in before the market starts.
Should I tell them where we're at? We're currently negotiating on 2 more.
Okay, so on market. So just to point out, this is an off-market deal, right? 12 incomes for 2.4 is just unmatched in all of the deals I've looked at. What is an on-market price that you're potentially seeing based on perhaps what an investor in Wellington might have purchased for that you might be trying to...
on market, you're easily adding 10, 20% easily, at least. Yeah, and that's basically because by the time that property has made it to market, 1, you've got a real estate agent who is incentivized to sell it for more, and 2, the kind of the pool of buyers is quite a bit bigger. And that's something we've actually learned as we've been going through this process is if you see a multi on Trade Me and it was listed 6 months ago and you're looking at it going, man, we've got a bargain here. Chances are you're not the first person to see it. And maybe there's something wrong with the property and you shouldn't dive into it. Yeah.
Cool. So I guess, what we need to talk about before we get to this, though, is just what's next? What is next?
Yeah, so James and I are really keen on buying more of these. As James said earlier, he's actually met with a real estate agent today, is selling his more traditional style investment property that he purchased, 8 years ago. And we're looking at tipping that equity into additional properties. And basically, the great thing about this project, when you compare it to some of the other styles of project you can do, like the likes of your traditional new build or commercial or something like that, is you can refinance the cash out of the property. So all of the equity that we've put in, we will try and take back out again because the cash flow is so good that it'll cover the debt when it's fully debt funded. We can take that capital and do it again and do it again and do it again. And that is basically the journey that James and I are on now.
Yeah.
Hence the need to, or the want to lift that value as much as possible because you're looking to raise that to the new 70% LVR.
Yeah. And there's that the market's not going to stay the way it is forever, and just making sure we take advantage of it before it starts to move whenever it is going to move.
100%. So We're getting towards the end of the presentation. We're going to go through a couple of things just about Lighthouse in the boardroom. But while we're doing that, make sure you put your questions in the Q&A function. I know we're running. Yeah, we've run right up to the top of the hour. Ravi's been going like this, hurry up the whole time for me.
I think as long as we want, Ravi, we're not going anywhere.
Yeah. So chuck them in and we'll get into them shortly.
Awesome. Just as a quick illustration, so Boardroom, which is the Wolfe property coaching service specific to multi-units, exactly as Mike and James have completed extremely successfully. And by the way, based on these OCR drops and that forecasted value, like we say, that was so long ago that the trend, based on how many people have registered for tonight, shows you that the anticipation is the market's going to increase. So everyone is looking for cash flow. That is what the Boardroom program is about. We're looking at a minimum return on total debt. So these guys achieved 10.7%, close to 11% in the capital city. A deal that's about to close today is in Auckland for 10% based on what we want to achieve. So, when you've got the right team and the metrics and you know how to calculate this is exactly the minimum. 10% is what we're looking to achieve. If you'd like more info, we're going to send out an email tomorrow with both the recap on all the details. We've absolutely gone through it lightning speed, but really important you kind of just let that sink in. If you'd like to have a chat, the next boardroom, we will start in February.
Yeah. And I just want to quickly talk about, Ilse, the fee that you charge, because some people will look at it and have no experience and go, well, that's a lot of money. Can I just say, if you've never done this before, here are the risks. The first one, you buy the wrong property.
Yeah.
And we have seen people buy the wrong property and it costs them a hell of a lot more money. The second one is the renovation strategy. You get that wrong. You don't have the right people. Look, in terms of Mike and I, we have no conflicts of interest in terms of, with Ilse endorsing her. It's just madness for me for you to do this by yourself the first time. You might go and take all the skills from working with Ilse and then go, great, I picked these things up. I'm going to run with them and go do my own thing. But if we're talking about risk, that's outside of my risk spectrum for sure.
Yeah, 100%. I think probably the last one as well is these sorts of projects, if we were doing this on our own, would have got very overwhelming very quickly.
We would pull the trigger.
Yeah, because we would look at it and go, this is too much work, too much risk, too much going on. Having someone who can kind of guide you through it has been absolutely invaluable. Yeah.
That's amazing. Thank you.
Cool. And if you want to talk about debt, properties, mortgages, scan the link and get in touch with us. While I can't get you a pre-approval for this style of property, what I can do is just base it around some loose numbers. So basically you fill out an application form and then I can go, hey, based on the numbers you provided, based on, let's say, I'm usually conservative, so I'll go 9% return. Here's the price. Here's the cost. You're roughly in the ballpark. And that is a really good starting point because you go, yep, you know what? I'm pretty close to pulling the trigger. I can go and do the thing.
Yeah. And I have to say that all of my units and actually a massive chunk of all the multis I've seen, it literally to get success on, at least from a cash flow, or like from a post-tax point of view, they're all through Lighthouse, actually, and all of mine are. So what can make or break the deal literally is the finance structure.
Yeah.
It could be the more traditional one that I'm more used to. It could be the second, which is actually how Mike and James funded theirs with the construction aspect too. Either way, whatever gets you success, so you get to the end result that you need, there you guys to talk with. They've seen all the examples. They've probably experienced whatever you've experienced before, and they can get it right.
The other one that we haven't spoken about, which is important, is just making sure you find the right lawyer. If your parents have got a lawyer and they're going to give you the lawyer because they did a will for them X number of years ago, just make sure you've got somebody who's a specialist in this area because this is complicated stuff.
Yeah.
So we've got some questions to roll through. Mike, I know you're not wearing your contacts. You're not going to be able to read this. Ilse, can you read those?
Okay.
Oh.
Would you recommend using KiwiSaver to purchase a first? To purchase a first home, live in for the minimum term, and in that time renovate to sell after the term and then flip? Do you think it's worth it?
So effectively what we're saying here is you're going to purchase your first home using your KiwiSaver. And one of the conditions of using your KiwiSaver is that you've got to be an owner-occupied property. The minimum you have to live in that property for is 6 months. So if it makes sense that, yep, I want to do this project, this flip, this burst strategy, I don't see why you wouldn't use your KiwiSaver. I mean, so long as the rest of the deal is the rest of the project, you've thought through the risk. Yeah, it's just the same as using your deposit. You just need to live in it for a minimum of 6 months.
Yeah. And that's the big thing is you've just got to be able to execute. You got to be able to know what you're doing.
Yeah.
Question there: have you achieved these results in Auckland? 100%. So basically 10% gross return on total debt is the gold standard, regardless of where it is. We want to overlay that with all of the property fundamentals that you probably already know about. So strong economy, positive, consistently positive population growth, great diverse employment, etc. And as I just mentioned, actually 10% return project in Otahu about to be on contract today. So I want that update.
Yeah.
Cool.
Next question. So, are there any different regulations for overseas or non-citizen property buyers in New Zealand? There are. So, effectively, to buy property easily in New Zealand, you either need to be New Zealand, Australian, or Singapore, I believe it is, or someone needs to be a resident or a citizen. There are definitely limitations to buying properties in New Zealand if you're not a citizen or in one of the qualifying jurisdictions. So, person to speak to about that would probably be a property solicitor based in New Zealand, although I'm sure there's a ton of information online. Actually, I know there's a ton of information online about it.
Interesting question. Did you purchase without tenants to carry out renovations? If that's more of a not this project specific, what you would expect, the first thing that popped to mind is that should be a heck of a bargain, because part of the value in a multi-unit property is the income. So having any vacancy, if it's all vacancy, it's like a commercial property, it's worth a lot less. So that's something to factor into the deal if that's the case. But so I think what you might be alluding to here is, would you try and have a vacancy for settlement?
Vacant possession, yeah.
So I think this example is a hybrid. We had some we could roll into, and the shuffle was sort of the strategy. Also, I would say the most critical thing is, if the deal is good enough and strong enough that you want to secure it, you work out the parts that are malleable or negotiable. So even if in an ideal world we would want, depending on the property and location, to have vacant possession, if the vendor was hard-nosed and said, I'm not giving notice, that's your job once you settle, that would not change the deal for me. As long as I could make sure I could handle that lower cash flow until that turnover to the high cash flow. If the deal is that good, you work with some of those details to get the job done.
Yeah. So, the other thing I would say, though, in terms of managing risk, is if the property is vacant, you're planning to renovate, just do not do the thing where you're like, oh, I can knock this out in 10 weeks. I would be planning like 6 months plus, where you'll be able to service the debt by yourself, because, things in this situation, I mean, it's gone pretty well, but they don't go this well every time, right? You will run into obstacles. It's important that you've got large contingencies to deal with it.
Yeah.
Cool. The next two questions are kind of the same questions, so I'll answer them together. Did you get all new tenants, or were the tenants happy to pay, basically double the rent after the renovations? The next one is, how many of the tenants decided to leave due to rent increase, or was everyone happy with it? Look, effectively, although we didn't get a head tenant, for the price point and the socioeconomic level of our tenants, a lot of their rent is actually covered by Work and Income New Zealand. So for them personally, their rent didn't really increase too much. The majority of it was picked up by Work and Income. So no, none of our tenants, I believe, have left.
No. The only change, if I can jump in, was that the highest recall I have is walking into one of the tenancies where one of the original tenants had decided to take it upon themselves to rip off wallpaper and jib stop. Do you remember that? That was the one we decided not to offer the new rental to.
Yeah.
Everyone else had the option based on the rapport and the intel from the existing manager saying, hey, 9 of these 10 are awesome, keep them on.
Yeah.
And then they helped manage the process of the rent increase through wins. So it was really well managed.
Yeah. So effectively, although our rent that we received increased, the rent that they were paying didn't really increase that much at all. So again, great outcome for both parties.
Won't it take a long time to bring the current rent? Oh, so if it had been organic rent growth from 220 up to 470, exactly. That's time no one has.
Yeah. So the question is
renovation.
The question is, did it take a long time to bring the rent up from 220 per week to the target rent of 470? As Ilse just said, it's all just rolled out over a period of time.
Yeah.
And
so
it's actually been a date, right, that you've secured from the 5th of December, new rents apply. but also because you're also wanting to keep the tenants happy with it. There's obviously disruption, right? So there are 2 or 3 renovations from, 9 till 5 in your neighbor's home, so you can hear that. So the rents, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, you've kept them down at the original until here all renovations completed, and here's the set.
Well, I mean, you got to give them 90 days notice for a rental increase anyway. So we were just like, it's going to this level. They knew their rents were very, very low, but I mean, you also argue for the quality of the home, probably fair enough.
Yeah.
But if you also look at comparables in the market, go 1 bedroom, what's the cost? It is, and like Mike said, none of the tenants have left.
Yeah. So one of the questions there were, how many hours are involved with this for both James and Mike? Not everyone has this much time during the day. And can you hire someone to actually manage this for you? You guys want to take this?
It's like we've just lived, like, I couldn't say how many hours it's been. I think the cool thing about Mike and I doing it together is there's been a period where I feel like I haven't done much. Certainly, obviously, the lending side, when Mike did a lot, there's periods where I took a lot of the, the politician side and kind of working through some of these obstacles. I mean, I'm always on the phone. I'm always looking at you're kind of not off with it.
This is the hardest question to answer, right? New investors who come to meet with me, how much time? I find this a really tough one. I think in terms of lever, other people's money, other people's time, spend your time with your highest dollar and have this working in parallel. I think there's this notion out there that you need to leave. If you're successful, you've left your work to do this. I totally disagree. Do what you're great at, keep that cash flow coming in. Let this be the additional value add, additional cash flow.
Yeah. It's not no time. And the other thing, like, if I'm being really honest, like, it takes a little bit of time, but like, I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I like it's like, it's fun.
Yeah.
Like it's stressful, but it's really fun.
I think this is also, as I spoke about personality types before, I think you've got to have a certain personality type to be able to, like Mike said, enjoy it. To be able to roll with the punches, to like, if you're getting really stressed out about this and going home, like that's no fun for everybody. I think that's another important piece.
Yeah, definitely. There's a question there about, so the upon complete value, just to clarify, these end figures that we just mentioned on those 2 scenarios, they were forecast back in July, August. So to answer, is it better to have done that then or now? We at least have those values. So all that needs to happen is we call the valuer out now. We go, cool, we've done what we said we'd do. They come out, see it visually. They check a box, they sign a certificate and say, cool, you did what you said. That's that value. There's an argument to say, hey, OCR's come down, retail rates have come down. The cap rate, which will value based on a doubling of income, quite likely those 2 figures we've given you are extremely light. There's a strong possibility. So you could suggest that, the proof will be in the pudding because they actually will get a separate valuation. It's more likely the values are much higher than what we've said with a fresh as is valuation based on how they present now.
Yeah, I know the other thing like that we've spoken about is we have no track record, like Mike and I personally, because our names are on the title of doing this. And, some guys have rolled down from Auckland, this is going to be great. We're going to renovate some units. We're going to get the rents up. People can have nice houses. And I'm sure the value's like, yeah, mate. I've had some people say that to me in the past.
It is thousands of times.
Like the piece of paper versus the delivery of it. And the question is to what quality? Because I'm sure there's a lot of people, you start running out of money, you start skimping. What is the actual quality of the output? That's really important in the
confidence and evidence of what you're going to produce is critical. So that's something that James and Mike knew, to supply as much detail upfront to give confidence. A valuer is naturally going to be cynical. That's their job. They want to be conservative because they have a duty not only to these 2, but also to the bank. And if they overshoot, they're in big trouble. So that's the error of the side of that they're on the side of caution. Yeah.
Cool. How many times did you travel to see the property before purchasing and after purchasing? We bought it without actually, James and I hadn't physically gone and seen the property.
We got some very poor quality FaceTimes of the property. And we went and saw it once after we settled,
signed on it.
And I'm going back down in a couple of weeks. I'm going down by myself because once again, Mike's valuer. So I'm going back down in a couple of weeks as well. But I mean, a lot of this is, it's really interesting. And I don't know if that question around, have you done this in Auckland comes into it, but the whole like, I want to drive past it, I want to see what's going on site. It's just about the numbers, right? As long as you've got people on site.
Yeah. And it's you've got the skill set of Dave and the team, our build team, the other aspect is the communication. So as long as you have milestones, you're on time, you're getting communication, you're getting visuals, you can see things are happening. It's not saying, hey, I want this done in 12 weeks. It's give me twice weekly visual updates to see things are moving, because you can't get to week 11 and realize nothing has happened. Clearly you can't catch up. So making sure that you've got team that are pre-qualified, right? So that's part of, in the boardroom, we have the power teams.
Cool. Next question. For hands-free, can I follow the steps to learn?
Oh, interesting. So hands-free is very much about for those who are not keen on learning the process. So the hands-on is sort of a webinar focused, very small group, twice a year. So February next year we'll start. It's with a valuer who is 40 plus years, basically wrote the entire playbook for the large national chains, has rewritten all the valuation tools for us specifically. So co-taught by myself and this valuer. That is hands-on. Hands-off is when basically we get a professional sports player comes to me and their wealth advisor has said, hey, I know you don't care about the BRRRR and you don't really care how you get from here to here to here and how much the reno is. Basically, they'll say, Ilse, I've got X amount for lending for the purchase. I have X amount allocated for the reno. Just give me the 10% gross returns. I don't really care how you get there. I just want it to turn up.
Or me when it starts.
Yeah. They don't care about the method. It's just deliver this. And what I didn't realize, but has become the case, it's very much sort of a high income earner or professional sports players retirement plan. So, if you're in a really high income situation, you don't necessarily want to be taught and handheld through the process, but you need something that picks up for when you want to stop that high income earning job. This is a great place, a replacement.
Cool. Next question. A little confused about the actual amount of debt you took on. How much of the 30% was cash and how much was raised through equity release? Equity from your own houses must have increased your debt figure. So when we're talking about the debt on this property, the equity that James and I used to put in was both an equity release from our house. So technically it is still debt. We will be shifting that debt from, from our personal houses onto the property once the project is finished. And that's the next stage of the finances, which is when we refinance the mortgage up to its maximum value or maximum lending of the new value. So 70% of the purchase price was the first one. And now we're going to do 70% of the end completed value. That will give us our cash back and we can pay off the debt on our personal properties. Are we going to do that though, James? No, we're going to go do it again.
Yep, that's right. So we had to tip in about 720 combined.
Yep.
And then, so total purchase price, 2.6 was the debt. Then we get the reno, we're about 3 million.
About 3 million.
Yeah.
Yep.
Awesome. Was it off market? Yes, this was off market. So we have a handful of off market deals. It's general rule of thumb is for the off market deals, they typically come with an extra equity buffer or win because of the nature of them being off market. There's usually an extra benefit. But that's not to say that my clients also don't get these awesome results on market. So some of the strongest deals have definitely been on market. So there's a mix of both. It's more about the criteria and helping my clients understand what those levers are to get to that end result and get those results and those gains.
Yeah. And how do we find those properties off market? We don't. Ilse does. People bring them to Ilse because she has buyers. So basically it might be a distressed situation, someone who doesn't want to know they're selling, ton of reasons why you might not want it to go to market. They don't usually call your average Joe and say, hey, do you want this property? You've got to be someone like Ilse working in the property industry.
I think also because my clients are pre-approved. The finance is sorted before, whether regardless of boardroom or accelerate. When a client starts work with me, we've already taken the lead from their financial advisor on here's your lending and here's what you need to deliver to make that work. So a vendor or an off-market deal finder knows that by coming to myself, they can see the criteria on the website and it solves a problem for the vendor. That's basically how they're found. And I guess having that buyer pool means that it's a natural place for quite a few to come.
Cool. Next one. Also, for your Accelerate clients, have you had clients buy more than one property in a year?
Yeah, so if you're looking at the website, the Compare Services tab, then Accelerate is either a single project, so that's deliverable is deliver one project. The difference in cost is $5,000 for the 12 months. So basically, almost all of my clients will come into 12 months if their lending allows. Basically, the expectation is 2 or more. So that's what we do. If you'd like to look at the replay on my YouTube channel, which is Rinse and Repeat with Ilse Wolfe, you'll see most recent webinar in October actually has a perfect example of standalone property, 6-week or 7-week reno, re-leveraged, 52% increase in value. And already now we're looking for that second one 2 months later.
Cool.
Yeah.
The next question we've already covered, so I'll jump ahead. Is the location and suburb part of the criteria of purchase, or are these mainly only in lower socioeconomic areas?
They can be honestly everywhere. It's about the figures and relying on property managers and experts on the ground that we trust their appraisals. We trust the teams and how our builders price. What I would comment is that a cosmetic renovation for a 1-bedroom unit in Gisborne is completely different from that price in New Plymouth. So I know those different parameters and those market idiosyncrasies. So we can kind of piece together a template of purchase price plus X number of dwellings times this approximate budget based on $46 million of deals, helps us calculate in advance the results. So it's not suburb or socio-specific. The socio location can actually play more into whether the head tenant or 12 individual tenants is relevant.
Cool. Also, can you outline what the Wolfe Property Boardroom services are at each step of the process?
Perfect. Yeah. So in terms of the hands-on, just to really break it down, but that's a good question that I can answer in the email, make sure it's really clear. The process is 5 or 6 weeks of webinar focused with myself and the valuer, learning the theory, having access to the education portal and all of those case studies as well in parallel. So it's a really intimate learning environment. And then moving into using your personalized lending criteria, starting to connect you with off-market and on-market opportunities. So 6 weeks of learning up front, regular whips, and then moving into the deal. And as I say, it's deliverable focused. So some clients, we have the deals locked and loaded within 3-4 months, completely renovated and done. For others, it can take 6 to 9 months. It's about finding the deal that hits the criteria.
Yep. Next one. Also, what are these
teams.
power teams that you keep mentioning?
Power
Who are
teams.
these power rangers? What is going on?
Basically, it's everyone on the ground where the property is, all those experts, builders, plumbers, painters, property managers.
Archies.
Yeah. Anyone who physically does the work that you're leveraging. So you're here in the office doing what you do best. They are the people on the ground, basically allow you to invest remotely.
Yep.
The best way to put it.
Cool. Can I still access the Power Team network after the project is done for another one on my own?
Many of my clients do that. Absolutely.
Cool. Next one. As part of the boardroom, do you agree criteria with the client at the beginning?
Perfect. So yes, in the inquiry process, which will be the link that we, ideally we meet in January to finalize, okay, what's the lending you've got? It will be, what is your lending capacity based on your approval or pre-approval or indicative, as well as any rent requirements. But we will for sure overshoot any minimum bank calculators because that's the nature of what we want is better than. So apart from that, basically, if you want to join boardroom, criteria is we'll create a 10% plus gross return, assuming that the whole thing is debt. 30% deposit over here is debt, 70% on the purchase is debt, and renovation is debt. We want a 10% plus return from that post-renovation rent.
And I think that was the last question.
How good.
All right.
Well,
James, you want to wrap it up?
Yeah. Well, Ilse, thank you very much, not just for tonight, but for holding Mike and I's hand through this whole thing.
Yeah.
I can't wait to go buy another one. Now, Ilse did talk about the couple of episodes that we did on checks and balances. Make sure to go and check out our channel on YouTube, Spotify, Apple. Much thanks for investing some time on a Wednesday night into your future. We'll catch you next time.
Go buy some
Thanks so much.
Maltese.